Welcome to Hip Hop Now Podcast. If you're from the future, you know what to do. Get your ass out of here. Don't disrespect the legend. Hip hop is here to stay. Let's get right into the business. What up, y'all? I am your host, Vegas, and this is another Hip Hop Now Podcast bonus episode. Big shout out to all the supporters who have subscribed to this channel. And guess what? We are on the road to 1,000 subscribers. And well, all that means is we need a few more, y'all. Right now, we are closing in on 700 subscribers to this channel. Not that long ago, a few weeks ago, it was like what? Trying to get to 500, and now we're already at 700. So if you like the content I produce, but you've never subscribed, now's your time. If you're new here and you like it, now's the time to subscribe. Obviously, hit that like button, but what works the best is the people who like it, like yourself, go and say, yo, on Discord, y'all should check this out. Yeah, on Reddit, y'all should check this out. Sharing it with people is the greatest thing you can do to help out a brother. Obviously, there are other ways to support this podcast and the content that I'm producing every week, not only on audio form, but also right here on YouTube at Hip Hop Pod. We appreciate you. And one of the ways you can do so is there's a QR code right on the screen. It's been there for the last couple of episodes now, where you can support the podcast. That'll bring other things to life. Like if you look at this circle real close and you pay attention to my next couple of videos, I'm not in the garage. I'm in my office at home, which will get a nice podcast makeover style pretty soon. But I'm not the type to be like, boom, new set. Slowly but surely we get there. But if you would like to help or you have great ideas, supporting via CashApp through the QR code right there on the screen that you can scan with your phone is greatly appreciated. Now, on this channel and coming up after this video debuts, or if you're watching it later, both are available. That means you're from the future, so get your ass out of here. But we are celebrating the legacy, the lives, the careers of legendary hip-hop group. In some cases, kind of gets slept on from time to time. De La Soul. If you don't know De La Soul, they are more than just 3 feet high and rising. Stakes is high. De La Soul is dead. Did that in third. They have about 8 or so albums in their catalog. And like with the other ranking videos, I went back and listened to all of them. But also, there's a book out called High and Rising. And the author's name is Marcus J. Moore. I just did an interview with him. It's a great book, especially if you're a De La fan, if you would like to learn about De La. It's a nice reason to learn about De La, learn about yourself as a hip-hop head, maybe also. But also go back and listen, because one of the gifts and the curses of streaming is, sure, these record labels and streaming services, they don't pay the artists what they should pay them. But it is a way to introduce you, if you don't know, to their music. It makes their music accessible. So if you discover De La Soul through, Spotify, for example, and you go listen, we'll also go over to De La Soul, their website, their pages on social media, and support them directly, because they have a lot of exclusives over there, and it's dope. And, as a way to commemorate the release of this book, Celebration of De La Soul, we are going to rank, or at least I am, going to rank the albums in their catalog. Like I always do about this time, my tier lists are a little bit different. You see everybody else's, you may see S's and D and A and B. And now we don't do that. We create categories 1 through 5 that represent the artist or the group we're talking about. In this case, we're talking about De La Soul. So we're going to start at the top, which is the highest level, and it is called High and Rising. Okay. That could be classic if you want to call it classic. That could be goated if you want to call it goated. That is the top tier on this list. Then right under that, which would be like a great album, maybe not high and rising, but it's great. Its stakes is high because guess what? Stakes is high when you're getting that close to perfect status. Even though no album is perfect, but you know what I mean. Right there in the middle, as far as like being like, well, it's good. Spitkicker.com. If you don't know what I mean by that, go listen to the albums. All of this stuff is coming from the albums anyway. But that basically means good, not bad, not great, but good. But then we start to go down into Say No Go, an album that probably should have been better. Not garbage, but knocking on the door of garbage. And the last category, Ghostweed. Now, Ghostweed is a skit on one of their albums where you a regular person could smoke this weed and rhyme like Fife or rhyme like Rod Digger or rhyme like Pharoah Monch. And it was a nice interludes that to me worked because they were entertaining, but you also got to hear from some of your favorite spitters in hip hop. But it's treated as garbage because the metaphor is, you have to be this way in order to try to be like this greatness, right? It's almost like copying and cheating instead of like working your pen out, you're gonna smoke this thing, and then all of a sudden you'll be nice as Pharoah Monch, right? At least that's the way I took the skit to be. So if you see any of these albums pop in that category, just know they're trash. Okay. So let's get right into the business, starting with their debut album, 3 Feet High and Rising. And I'm not even gonna hold y'all, High and Rising. I say this only because it's such a great debut for a lot of different reasons, but most importantly, because it laid out the foundation for not only De La Soul, and I'm not just talking about the Daisy Age part of it, but it kind of set where they would go, in the future as far as the skits and the different topics they talked about and the different themes that came across in their albums, all date back to 3 Feet High and Rising, which is an album that a lot will say is very different because of the samples and because of the fun, love, and feel of it. And most people, I would tell you straight up, I was young when this dropped. I might have been like 11. It worked for me big time. And I know it worked for a lot of people who were older than me with hits like Me, Myself, and I Know, and Say No Go. Like, these deep potholes in my lawn. Like, De La Soul was dope and respected across the board. And even though it's heavy on the skits at the time, there weren't many albums that were constructed in that way. Shout out to Prince Paul also playing a part. But as we went on in hip hop, there were plenty of albums that it was almost mandatory to have a certain number of skits on your album. And De La Soul did that early and effectively. So there you have it with 3 Feet High and Rising. Undeniable High and Rising. Their second album, De La Soul is Dead. They were making a statement that the Daisy Age, all the flowers and all what you thought we were, you thought we were hippies of hip hop, is dead now. We dropping this joint. I'm going to say this in stakes is high. Now, I know some people who swear by this album, and some people will say to themselves, this is their best album, but then there's some people who say this is their worst album, which is crazy. And I think if I had to be real, I think they were still figuring out who they were going to be if they weren't going to be the Daisy Age, the hippie rappers. They never set out to be the hippie rappers. It's just what they got labeled. So this was like a rebuttal to that labeling. But one of the things, my biggest knock on this album is not the music. It's more so the skits. It was cool on 3 Feet High and Rising. It kind of fit the aesthetic and the feel of the entire, the rhymes, everything. It fit everything. De La Soul's Dead felt excessive, right? Like, yo, I don't think we needed some of these joints on here, like at all. It's making this album a longer listen than it needs to be. And it's getting in the way of the flow of the songs because when you go back and listen, like I listen, there's so many dope tracks on here. A lot of people just don't realize it. You know what I'm saying? And I think in a lot of ways, it's still a very great album, but the amount of skits may be a hurdle for some listeners. Then they followed that up. Now, granted, I should have been saying this from the beginning, but to give you some context, 3 Feet High and Rising dropped in 1989. De La Soul is Dead dropped in 1991. Then in 1993, De La Soul released their third album, Balloon Mind State. And I'm not going to hold y'all after time and let's go back and listen. And this is Stakes is High. I would have never said that back then. Not because I heard it, thought it was whack, and all of a sudden now I think it's good. I just think this is probably the follow-up to 3 Feet High and Rising that De La Soul is Dead should have been. It was a more mature sound, but still boom bap, and they were way more comfortable in a lot of ways. And I say boom bap, I don't necessarily mean the style of beats because I mean you can sample jazz and all kinds of things. But I mean it felt like don't look at us as hippies, it's hip hop, and that's what we care about. You know what I'm saying? We don't really care about responding to critics in the way we did with De La Soul is Dead. We're just gonna make great music. And I feel like Balloon Mind State might be pretty slept on in their catalog. And another shout out to the High and Rising book by Marcus J. Moore that kind of points out this album and this approach being a little bit ahead of their time and it kind of being the design mentally, even though they all worked on it, the design mentally of pop, which you kind of get that if you listen to Pastanu's rhyme style. He's real technical. He's not necessarily a in the pocket, always on beat kind of rapper. He's a ebb and flow kind of cat. Like if it's taking me here and it's taking me there or up there or whatever, it's going to be what it's going to be. With Dave doing something similar on the next album, but Balloon Mind State, that was pointed out in the book, what really sticks out to me is when it dropped and what else was dropping. Because you talk about 1993, well, Wu-Tang dropped that year. Snoop Dogg dropped Doggy Style that year. And A Tribe Called Quest followed up the critically acclaimed Low End Theory with Midnight Marauders. So someone like myself who was getting introduced to all of these, my favorite group, A Tribe Called Quest, releasing another dope album, me being hyped for Snoop album, let alone everybody else that was dropping around the time, especially Wu-Tang. I wasn't really checking for De La the way I used to. So this was one of those albums that got past me because I figured, well, not too many people talking about it, so why do I need to go back? But y'all sleeping. Stakes is high. All right. Speaking of Stakes is high, that's the next album. I'm not going to hold you, man. Stakes is high. High and Rising, De La Soul, released in 1996. And just to give you an idea of Balloon Mind State releasing within the eye of the storm of new hip hop releases and a lot of competition, but a lot of people not really checking for it. Stakes is High was the complete opposite because it released in 96. Tupac had two albums, All Eyes on Me and Machiavelli. Fuji's dropped The Score. Jay-Z dropped his debut, Reasonable Doubt. Nas had his follow-up to It Was Written, which was it was written to Illmatic, which was highly anticipated, and It Was Written. Redman dropped arguably his best album, Muddy Waters. This is all in the year 96, and I'm not even mentioning everybody, to be clear. And De La Soul was able to capture our attention, some of which with songs and lyrics that kind of criticized some of their peers in the hip hop game, but it made a statement for De La Soul. And I mean, when I say statement, I'm talking more so lyrically. This is when they stepped fully in the hip hop bag with the beats, as far as being not just experimental, but just planting a flag like the De La Soul is dead for real, because this is who we are now. This is us fully realizing our powers as MCs and mainstays in this game. And if you look at these four albums in a row, and where I have them, tells you a lot about De La Soul. None of these albums are the same. And whatever knocks I may have on a song here, or too many skits, or the length of an album, it's all quality work. So, and we're not even done. So there you have that. Then back in, so that was what? That was 96. Then about 4 years passed. And at the time, they called it a trilogy. So I was a little excited considering what I have here and how I feel about these albums in a catalog. I was excited about the idea of a trilogy with the name of Art Official Intelligence. The first in that series dropped in 2000. It's called Mosaic Thumb. Art Official Intelligence, uh, Mosaic Thumb. And I think this album is slept on. I'm not even gonna hold y'all. I think it's incredibly slept on. It almost doesn't get mentioned, probably because De La has a bunch of dope albums. This is probably, excuse me, one of the first tier lists where I begin, and most of the albums are at the top, and we're 5 albums deep. But I think this album is kind of slept on because, like, lyrically, again, they're in their bag. To me, the Ghost Weed skits work. They're not annoying. It's not a million of them like before, but they got a lot of dope features on here, right? Like Tosh is on here, Exhibit, DV alias Christ. I thought I went to high school with him. I ain't gonna lie, y'all. Busta Rhymes is on here. Shaka Khan, remember All Good? That joint was on here. Busy B from back in the days is on here. Freddie Fox is on here. And I feel like it was a perfect follow up to the energy of Stakes is High, right? Like they kind of found their footing where they could be respected lyrically as well as just who they were. But I don't think enough people talk about this album when they talk about their favorites. The second follow up in this trilogy, released the very next year in 2001, is Art Official Intelligence, Bionics. I'm not going to hold y'all. This is spitkicker.com. Now, even though I don't feel like it's a bad album or even leaning bad, I just feel like it's a very different album. The music feels more like they've taken all of throughout their history of music and their albums, they've taken that energy of the songs they had that became party hits, whether they intended or not. And this happened literally through all their albums. There was always a song that would play in the club. And I felt like this album tried to lean into that a little bit more. I don't know if that was intentional, but after you're listening to those first 5 albums, this is the one that feels like it's, painting outside the lines, but not necessarily in a creative way. Almost like they're trying to recapture, lightning in the bottle. And again, on this album, they had a song like Baby Fat right up in the De La Soul up in the club, because I was still in the clubs around this time. 2001, that Baby Fat joint was crazy in the club. And I don't know, some of the women I would think, I'm not gonna say that, but I don't know if they knew this was De La Soul, like from back in the days that made this dope record. Uh, but yeah, man, like songs like that were dope. But again, there were things about the album, certain skits that now were reminding me of why, I wanted them to back off a little bit with the skits. And really also I found listening to their catalog that the albums that worked best for me were typically shorter, right? They either came in at an hour or a little bit under. But the skits always took them, 6 minutes, 9 minutes, I think even in one case, 19 minutes past the hour runtime that works for me as a listener. So I think that album was cool, but it wasn't that great to me. Uh, then in 2004, they dropped one of the most critically acclaimed albums for them. And one of the albums that are their later albums that most people, especially De La fans, point to as a dope album, and that's The Grind Date. But I think that's SpitKicker.com. And I say that because I feel like the joints on this album that stand out really stand out. Like, for example, my favorite record, I put it on my stories all the time, Much More, with DJ Premier talking and Yummy singing. I love that record to death, but one record doesn't make an album. Another standout in your face, like you have to blink twice, but like, yo, this is a De La Soul record. Rock Cocaine Flow featuring MF Doom. That beat, that slow down towards the end, them slowing down with their lyrics, so dope. But again, two songs don't make an album. Now, granted, there are a number of songs I could point to on here that are cool, but there are a number of songs that I would skip. I I expected a little bit more from the Ghostface feature. The Carl Thomas feature felt like this ain't it. I know what you're trying to do, but this ain't it. Shopping Bags was a good two-step in the club joint. Like I said, De La Soul is good for a really good one or two songs that could bump in the club. But then it was a lot of hit or miss for me after that. And, it wasn't that it was whack, because I don't think any of these songs are necessarily whack. It just left a little bit more to be desired, in my opinion. Uh, then just darting back to 96 real quick, or 2004 when this was released. It's Live at Tramps NYC 1996, De La Soul performing. And I feel like this is cool. If you've never been to a De La Soul show, um, you know, uh, 96 and back, this was a good way to catch them performing at their height. And what's extra dope about this is one of the songs performed, because Common is with them, is a diss record Common performed about Ice Cube called Bitchin' You, which I think is crazy to even be on this album, to even be a part of De La Soul set. Now, it's a way to usher him in because they've worked together on different songs. So you have him in your show, you do the song with him, but just the fact that they performed that record produced by Pete Rock was interesting. But as a live album, if you love De La, maybe you already have it. But if you don't, it's a great way to hear some of the songs you love in their catalog, just in a different way in a live performance set. Now, after 2004, De La Soul didn't release another album until 2016. The name of that album is called In the Anonymous Nobody. Now, this album is synonymous with them raising money to release a new album because they just didn't have the funds to do it in the way they wanted to do it. And they wound up exceeding that goal originally. Also, we knew about their beef with Tommy Boy Records, which had been ongoing. So a lot of people felt compelled to help, and I believe it was also nominated for a Grammy. But this album goes weed, y'all. It's ghost weed. This album goes weed. You thought I was gonna say something else? Let me tell you why. Um, Now, when we all saw the track listing, nothing on this track listing compared to people who they've had on albums throughout their career, which have been gone from interesting to just dope, that De La would just work with these many different people, not just the Commons and the Tribes, but like I said, Ghostface and Flavor Flav, and just different people, different artists. So when I looked at this list, I'm like, oh, Jill Scott, Snoop Dogg's on here, Rock Marciano, Pete Rock's on here, Usher's on here, 2 Chainz is on this album. I thought to myself, well, De La has not given me any reason to not trust their decisions, because, as you can see from my tier list, the majority of their catalog for me is anywhere from good to great. So my expectations were very high, and then they were brought down very low. This album isn't that great. This album steps away from a rhythm I think they had more than 10 years prior, which is to ask a lot for somebody to be on the shelf that long to come back out and put something out crazy. But it just sound and felt like, or not like, any of De La's material. And anyone can say, oh, well, you're expecting them to do what they did before. Well, yeah, but they've never had any albums be the same, including this one. But with all those other albums not being identical, they were still good, and there was still a core to De La Soul's sound. Whereas this felt like they were trying to mature the sound, but also take it in a more, I don't know, adult contemporary way, not just lyrically, because they've kind of always had the same subject matter in a lot of ways. But it didn't feel like fun. And even when De La is wagging their finger at you, gold chain, crystal popping girls in the video dudes, it still always felt fun, and it was about hip hop. And something about this album felt sad. And what was probably most sad was, back then, I expected, oh, they got 2 Chainz on here. What is that going to sound like? 2 Chainz had the best verse. No cap. Even though I'm wearing a cap, but that's some old head. That's some old man. Even though I'm wearing a cap, I'm not going to say cap. Listen, I didn't expect that. So not only was the overall sound not what I expected, I did not expect 2 Chainz to basically out-rap some of the greatest rappers of all time here in this group. Now, is that a huge knock on De La Soul not to really care for their last album? Because there's a lot of people who liked it, and I salute you. But if you've done like I've done throughout history, listen to their music, and some of it I had to go back because I either didn't remember or I hadn't heard an album in its entirety. Going through their catalog recently told me that they are one of the most consistent hip hop groups of all time. And them having one album that I'm really not feeling does not make a bad group or bad catalog. Their catalog is pretty stellar, and I might say a lot there ranks much higher than I would one of my favorite groups of all time, which I'm not going to say, but it's Tribe. So there you have it. That is my ranking of De La Soul's catalog. Did you have it the same way? Do you have some albums higher than others? Do you have more in the Ghost Suite section? Leave your comments in the comment section below. Subscribe to the podcast. Hit the like button if you like the episode. Leave comments. I read them. I respond to them. I share them if I can. But more importantly, share this video with people you know enjoy this kind of content. Until next time, y'all, I'm not a critic. I'm a fan. Peace.